We have l'Angelus, right, which is this kind of special prayer. Right, so these are, keep in mind that Millet he's one of the early, I mentioned this last week, he's one of the early artists that actually comes from more of a peasant class. Right? Most of the time the artists, up until the 19th century, most of them come from bourgeois, if not aristocratic backgrounds in Europe, right? Especially in France. And so this is quite new, and undoubtedly the very fact that he comes from working on farms and being of the peasant class, he's going to have a different way of looking at this subject matter. I mean, already he's probably going to have an interest in it that someone that comes from the city that's, very mondain will be like, what the hell? Why would I even be the least bit interested in this? So we've got this painting, the Angelus. So there's this quiet little evening prayer that we don't know for sure if it's a couple or just two, people that are working. There's kind of a suggestion that they may be a couple, right? Maybe not married yet, but perhaps moving in that. And then, of course, the very famous glaneuses, or the gleaners in English. And we talked about this, I think, a little bit in class. And one of the things that's interesting, and you can see some other Millet paintings here. This one is a little bit different with the kind of rainbow. But when you look at these two paintings, is there anything that jumps out to you about either how it's painted or what we see in the people that are being represented? What do we know about these people looking at the paintings? Go ahead. Go on. Miserable.
Yeah.
Okay, so what makes you say that they're miserable?
Well, on this one over there, all of them are pretty much like this.
Exactly.
And stuff, and
So yeah, so we have a sense of real physical labor, exactly. That this is not just, like la-di-da, I'm just kind of hanging out in the thing. It's like, well, they could be bent down all at once for a temporary time, but, well, given the title, and I explained to you that this is the name that we give to the people that come after the harvest to try and recuperate the last little bits of grain that they might be able to bring home, right? They have this privilege to do this. So that clearly is an indication that they're not among the richest part of society. Is there anything else about the way people, what do we know about these people when you look at how they're depicted? Go ahead, Rania. They are?
Praying.
They are praying. Okay, so in this case, yeah, they're definitely praying, right? We see her with head bowed. So there's a kind of, there's often a sense of sort of modesty and simplicity in the way people are presented by Millet. Do you have a sense of Millet's view of these people? Do you think that he... Go ahead.
He actually wasn't a bourgeois. He was a normal man who lived in the same conditions that these people did. So he looked at them just the way he looks at his own childhood or something. So he has an image of how they behave.
Okay. So, exactly. So he's definitely showing something that he knows. And do you have a sense that he's presenting it in a negative light, in a neutral light, or maybe presenting them in a more positive light? Any thoughts on that? Go ahead, Rania.
I think maybe he's presenting them in a positive light.
Right.
Because he's trying to show the simplicity and
Okay. So there's this sense that they're sort of simple, but could that also be negative? Could it be that, they're like, I don't know what words to use. I mean, that they're weak or that they don't know any better. Do you have that sense or not? Say that again?
Maybe a little bit.
Okay. Any other thoughts about that? My sense is that a lot of times when I look at Millet, and we fit him into the realist group, in a way, when you see Courbet, you're going to be like, well, these don't look at all alike, right? There's kind of this weird soft focus quality to a lot of the Millet paintings, right? If you look at the faces, we couldn't, if this painting was made right now from real models, we wouldn't be able to walk down the street and go, oh, that's Stéphanie there, right? I saw her in that painting, and that was Etienne, right? There's no real clear demarcation of these people. They stand as, I guess what the French would call the kind of, I don't know if it's quite right to say that they're typés, but they represent a kind of person. They're not a specific person, right? So I don't know. One of the questions that comes up about Millet is whether he has a real political sort of attitude about things, right? Is there a political component to the paintings or not? I think it's played down a little bit, but my sense is that he's saying, look, these people are hardworking, right? They're out there. They're anonymous, right? We don't know who they are. They're anonymous, but they're hardworking. They're out there in the morning. They work as hard as they can to get the stuff done. We need to, I think there's a sense of, I don't know if appreciation is the right word, but a sense of like, we need to recognize the labor that they're doing, right? I mean, they're feeding a whole country for one, right? And they're helping to do these harvests to get everyone money or food to eat. So I think that there's a little sense of trying to say, all right, we need to look at this part of society that for most part in France, in painting, hadn't been looked at with much care to this point, right? It's just like I was developing this whole thing about kind of looking at taxes in France historically, and I'm not an expert on economic questions, but I'm very interested in it these last 5 or more years, and I totally didn't understand this. Probably some of you that are French have heard this in your French history classes from even high school, but the tax, the taille, right, which was a long-standing tax under the French monarchy, was essentially a tax on the peasants. Noble didn't pay it, the clergy didn't pay it, most of the bourgeois were able to get around it. So the poorest part of society were actually paying a tax that other people weren't paying at all, that were doing quite a bit better. So anyway, it's just kind of interesting to see how in the realist movement, and this is what groups Millet with Courbet and with Corot, is that although his painting style is quite different, it's not as realist maybe as Courbet will be, but there's a sense of turning the artist beginning to look at different subject matter than had been looked at before, right? The neoclassical, it was all history painting of, famous events, famous people, legends from past glorious cultures, right? Ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and so on. And then, well, when you got into more contemporary things, it was like Napoleon, right? It was paintings of the king, it was paintings of the emperor, it was important people, right? Not this kind of stuff. And so the 19th century is going to see in France, this happens, for example, in the Netherlands and in Holland, there's more painting earlier that's of the middle class and the peasants and the working class. But usually there's kind of it's more of what we call a genre painting, so it's not quite as, I don't want to say elegiac, but it doesn't lift them up quite as much. Sometimes they're presented a little bit in a ridiculing way. So one of the things that's going to link, so realism is it's kind of a funny continuation in some respects of romanticism, but also a reaction from it. Right? So there's this kind of weird way in which, depending on the paintings that you look at and a little bit the artists that you look at, right? Delacroix with his sort of action paintings doesn't really fit into this too much. There are some of them that have a little more of this feel, but it's more about kind of movement and passion and emotion. And usually realism is a little more played down emotionally and more either about really describing stuff or showing reality that tends to be overlooked. All right, so that's what's going to kind of group it. Let's go forward a little bit.